She joined the Billionaire'S family for Christmas, and his reaction to her dress shocked everyone. Before we explore all the details of this incredible story, tell us where you're following us from and the time. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a thing, and let's embark on this journey together. She shouldn't have looked at him like that, but she did. Aaliyah Monroe stood frozen outside the mahogany doors of Sterling Industries' executive floor, her heart hammering against her ribcage. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting golden patterns across the marble floors, but all she could focus on was the conversation she'd just overheard. Ethan needs someone he can trust at the Christmas gala, someone who won't embarrass the family name. What about that assistant of his, the quiet one? Aaliyah? She's practically invisible. Perfect. 27 years old, and she was still invisible. Aaliyah adjusted the hem of her charcoal blazer and smoothed down her tightly wound chignon. Professional, efficient, forgettable. That's how she designed herself to be in this world of glass towers and billion-dollar decisions. It was safer that way. The elevator chimed softly as she stepped inside, her reflection staring back from the polished steel walls. Honey-colored skin that never saw enough sunlight. Dark eyes that sparkled with intelligence, but were always hidden behind wire-rimmed glasses. Curves that expensive, conservative clothing worked overtime to conceal. She'd been Ethan Sterling's executive assistant for 3 years. 3 years of morning coffee delivered at exactly 7:47 a.m. 3 years of scheduling meetings, managing his impossible calendar, and fielding calls from women whose names she'd learned not to remember. 3 years of watching him command boardrooms with the kind of confidence that made grown men stutter and competitors retreat. And in all that time, he'd never really seen her. The 52nd floor welcomed her with its familiar hush of wealth and power. Her heels clicked softly against the Italian marble as she made her way to her desk, a sleek workspace positioned strategically outside Ethan's corner office. She could see him through the glass partition, shoulders broad beneath his tailored navy suit, dark hair perfectly styled, fingers moving across his tablet with surgical precision. Ethan Sterling, 38 years old and worth more money than most small countries. The kind of man who graced magazine covers and made stock prices fluctuate with a single tweet. Cold as winter steel, they said, emotionally unavailable as a fortress. Aaliyah had never questioned why that description both intimidated and intrigued her. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling." Her voice carried its usual professional warmth as she entered his office with his coffee and the day's schedule. "You have the Morrison account review at 9, lunch with the Japanese investors at 12:30, and cancel everything after 2. His voice was deeper than usual, rougher around the edges. He didn't look up from his tablet. Aaliyah blinked. In 3 years, Ethan Sterling had never cancelled appointments. Ever. "Is everything all right, sir?" Finally, he raised his head, and those storm-grey eyes met hers. For a moment, just a heartbeat, she thought she saw something crack in his usually impenetrable expression. "My mother called." He set down the tablet and leaned back in his leather chair, running a hand through his hair in a gesture so unexpectedly human it made her breath catch. "The family Christmas gala is this Saturday." Aaliyah waited. She'd heard about the Sterling family gatherings, legendary affairs that mixed high society with holiday tradition, where business deals were struck over champagne and reputations were made or destroyed between the appetizer and main course. "I need you there." The words hit her like a physical blow. She set down the coffee cup with trembling fingers, grateful it didn't crash to the floor. "I'm sorry, I don't understand. You're the only person I trust." The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it shocked her. His jaw tightened, as if he regretted the words the moment they left his lips. "The press will be there. Family members I haven't spoken to in years. People who'd sell their grandmother's jewelry to get a headline about Sterling Industries." Aaliyah's pulse quickened. "Mr. Sterling, I'm just your assistant. I don't think I'm the right person for—" "You're not just anything." The intensity in his voice made her skin flush with unexpected warmth. "You've handled my business, my schedule, my life for 3 years without a single mistake. You know my company better than I do sometimes. You're—" He paused, those grey eyes studying her face with an attention that made her feel suddenly, impossibly exposed. "You're the closest thing I have to someone I can count on." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Outside the windows, Seattle's skyline glittered in the morning light, but all Aaliyah could focus on was the way Ethan was looking at her, really looking, for what felt like the first time. "What would you need me to do?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Something shifted in his expression. Relief? Gratitude? Or something deeper that made her heart skip dangerously? Just be yourself. Stay close to me. Help me remember why I prefer the office to family obligations. Stay close to me. The words echoed in her mind as she nodded slowly. Of course, Mr. Sterling, I'll make sure my schedule is clear. Ethan. His voice was softer now, almost vulnerable. If you're going to be my date for the evening, you should probably call me Ethan. Date. The word hung in the air between them like a confession. Aaliyah felt the ground shift beneath her feet, her carefully constructed professional world suddenly tilting on its axis. Because as she looked into Ethan Sterling's eyes, she realized she'd been lying to herself for 3 years. She wasn't invisible to him, and after Saturday night, she had the terrifying suspicion that nothing between them would ever be the same again. The mirror didn't lie, but Aaliyah wished it would. Standing in her modest Capitol Hill apartment Friday evening, she stared at her reflection with a mixture of determination and terror. Tomorrow night, she would walk into the most exclusive social event in Seattle, not as Ethan Sterling's invisible assistant, but as his date. The word still made her stomach flip. Her wardrobe told the story of 3 years spent in professional camouflage. Charcoal suits, navy blazers, cream blouses that buttoned up to her throat like armor. Safe clothes, invisible clothes, clothes designed to help her disappear into the mahogany-paneled background of Sterling Industries. But tomorrow required something different. Girl, you cannot show up to that party looking like you're about to take notes in a boardroom. Aaliyah turned as her best friend Jasmine burst through the front door, arms loaded with garment bags and a determination that could move mountains. At 26, Jasmine was everything Aaliyah had trained herself not to be: bold, unapologetic, and blessed with the kind of confidence that turned heads and changed minds. Jazz, I told you I could handle this myself. Handle what? Looking like a background extra at your own Cinderella moment. Jasmine dropped the bags on the couch and fixed Aaliyah with a look that brooked no argument. Honey, I've watched you hide behind those grandmother cardigans for 3 years. Tonight we're showing Seattle what Aaliyah Monroe actually looks like. The garment bags held secrets that made Aaliyah's pulse quicken. Silk that caught the light like liquid mercury. Velvet that begged to be touched. Colors she'd forbidden herself to wear. Emerald green, midnight blue, and tucked away like a dangerous confession. Deep, devastating red. I can't wear something like this to a Sterling family event, Aaliyah whispered, running her fingers over the crimson fabric. It's too much. I'll look like I'm trying too hard. Jasmine's laugh was warm and knowing. Baby, you've been trying too hard to disappear for years. Maybe it's time to try being seen. The dress was perfection in silk and sin, a sleeveless design that skimmed her curves without clinging, the hemline dancing several inches above her knees. The neckline was elegant but not modest, suggesting rather than revealing. It was the kind of dress that whispered confidence instead of shouting it. It was everything Aaliyah had never allowed herself to be. What if he regrets asking me? The fear tumbled out before she could stop it. What if his family takes one look at me and realizes I don't belong there? Jasmine's expression softened. She'd known Aaliyah since college, had watched her brilliant friend dim her own light to fit into spaces that were never designed for her brightness. Listen to me. Jasmine took her hands, forcing eye contact. That man sees you every single day. He could have asked anyone, any socialite, any model, any woman from his little black book of conquests. But he asked you, the woman who knows how he takes his coffee, who can finish his sentences, who's been the most important person in his life for 3 years without either of you admitting it. The truth of those words hit like lightning. Aaliyah's phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. Driver will pick you up at 7 p.m. tomorrow. Thank you for doing this, Aaliyah. It means more than you know. Her heart hammered as she stared at the message. No, Mr. Sterling. No formal distance. Just Ethan, reaching across the professional divide they'd built between them. She typed back, looking forward to it. Then, before she could second-guess herself, she added, Ethan. The 3 dots appeared immediately, disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, sleep well. Tomorrow changes everything. Aaliyah stared at the screen until it went dark, her reflection ghost-like in the black glass. Tomorrow changes everything. What did that mean? What did he know that she didn't? That dress, Jasmine said softly, watching her friend's face, is going to change his life. Later that night, alone with her thoughts and the red dress hanging like a promise in her closet, Aaliyah allowed herself to imagine walking into that mansion beside Ethan Sterling, not behind him, taking notes, not in the shadows, managing his schedule, but beside him, as an equal, as a woman worth seeing. The fantasy was terrifying and intoxicating in equal measure. She thought about the way his voice had changed when he called her his date, the flicker of something unguarded in those storm-grey eyes, the admission that she was the only person he trusted. For 3 years, she'd been the keeper of his secrets, the guardian of his schedule, the quiet force that kept his world spinning smoothly. She knew he took his coffee black because sweet things reminded him of his ex-fiancée's lies. She knew he worked late on his father's birthday because grief made him restless. She knew the exact tone of voice he used when a deal was about to go south, and the way his jaw tightened when his mother called with another demand disguised as a request. She knew Ethan Sterling better than anyone, but tomorrow night, wearing red silk and her own skin like armor, she was about to discover if he'd ever really known her at all. As she drifted towards sleep, one thought pulsed through her mind like a heartbeat. What if invisible had been her choice all along? And what if tomorrow she chose to be unforgettable instead? Outside her window, Seattle glittered with holiday lights, and somewhere across the city, in a penthouse that touched the clouds, Ethan Sterling lay awake, thinking about storm-grey eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and wondering why the thought of Aaliyah Monroe in a formal dress made his chest tight with an emotion he refused to name. Tomorrow would change everything. Neither of them was ready. Both of them were desperate for it to begin. She was about to change everything, and she knew it. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of crisp December air that made Seattle's city lights sparkle like diamonds against velvet. In her apartment, Aaliyah stood before her bathroom mirror, heart racing as she applied the final touch of lipstick, a shade called Dangerous Curves, that Jasmine had insisted was absolutely non-negotiable. The woman staring back at her was a stranger. Gone were the wire-rimmed glasses, replaced by contacts that made her dark eyes luminous and impossibly deep. Her hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, catching the light with each movement. The red dress hugged her body like a whispered secret, transforming her from efficient assistant to devastating woman with nothing more than silk and confidence. Her phone buzzed. Downstairs in 5 minutes. 5 minutes to become someone new. 5 minutes to step out of 3 years of carefully constructed invisibility and into whatever waited on the other side of tonight. The black town car gleamed under the streetlights like a promise. Through the tinted windows, she could see Ethan's silhouette, and her breath caught in her throat. Even sitting still, he commanded attention, broad shoulders filling out a midnight black tuxedo, the kind of formal wear that cost more than most people's monthly rent and fit like it had been born on his body. Aaliyah paused at the building's entrance, her hand on the glass door. This was it, the moment she stopped being background music and became the symphony. She stepped outside. The December air kissed her bare shoulders, but the chill was nothing compared to what happened when the car door opened and Ethan Sterling looked up. He froze. Not the controlled pause of a man gathering his thoughts, but the complete stillness of someone whose world had just shifted off its axis. His storm-grey eyes traveled from her heels to the hemline that danced around her thighs, up the silk that draped her curves like water, to her face, her unveiled, radiant, absolutely stunning face. He forgot to breathe. Aaliyah? Her name came out rough, uncertain, as if he couldn't quite believe the woman before him was the same person who'd brought him coffee every morning for 3 years. She moved toward the car with a grace she hadn't known she possessed, and Ethan found himself standing without conscious decision, his body responding to something his mind was still trying to process. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying a new note, confidence wrapped in warmth, power dressed in silk. "I hope I'm not overdressed." Overdressed. She was perfection incarnate, and she was asking if she was overdressed. "You're—" He swallowed hard, his usual eloquence deserting him entirely. "You look incredible." The word fell short by several galaxies, but it was all his stunned brain could manage. As she slid into the car beside him, the scent of her perfume, something warm and intoxicating that definitely wasn't the subtle lavender she wore to the office, filled the space between them. The distance that had always felt comfortable suddenly seemed charged with electricity. "Are you nervous?" she asked, and he realized she was studying his face with the same attention he usually reserved for merger documents. "About the party," he managed a laugh that didn't quite hide the tremor in his voice. "No, I've survived Sterling family gatherings before, but not with me," she said quietly, and the simple truth of it hung between them like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. No, not with her. Not with Aaliyah looking like every fantasy he'd never allowed himself to have, sitting close enough that he could see the pulse beating at the base of her throat, could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. The drive to his family's Bellevue estate passed in a haze of awareness. Every time the car turned, she swayed slightly closer to him. Every time she spoke, he found himself studying the curve of her lips. 3 years of professional distance evaporated like morning mist, replaced by something infinitely more dangerous. Ethan, her voice was soft, uncertain for the first time that evening. What you said yesterday about this changing everything, what did you mean? He turned to meet her gaze, and in the dim light of the car's interior, surrounded by the scent of her perfume and the whisper of silk against leather, Ethan Sterling made a decision that would reshape both their worlds. I meant, he said, his voice low and honest, that I've been lying to myself for 3 years about what you mean to me, and tonight, looking at you like this, he paused, his eyes searching her face. I don't think I can pretend anymore. The confession hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath and setting her pulse racing. She'd expected many things from tonight, but not this raw honesty, this admission that mirrored the truth she'd been hiding in her own heart. Ethan, I know what you're going to say, that we work together, that it's complicated, that there are 100 reasons why this is a bad idea. His hand moved toward hers, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel the heat of his skin. But right now, in this moment, I can't remember a single one of them. The car slowed as they approached the Sterling estate, its windows blazing with warm light and the promise of a night that would change everything. But for these last few seconds in the darkness, it was just them. No titles, no professional boundaries, no carefully constructed walls. Just a man and a woman who'd been dancing around the truth for 3 years, finally ready to stop pretending they didn't feel the music. Neither can I, Aaliyah whispered, and watched as something wild and wonderful sparked to life in Ethan's eyes. The car stopped. Beyond the tinted windows, she could see figures in evening wear moving through the mansion's grand foyer, champagne glasses catching the light like fallen stars. But all she could focus on was the way Ethan was looking at her, as if she were the most beautiful miracle he'd ever witnessed. Tonight was going to change everything. And for the first time in her life, Aaliyah Monroe was ready to be unforgettable. The Sterling family mansion didn't just host parties, it devoured them whole and transformed them into legend. Aaliyah's breath caught as their car glided through wrought iron gates that probably cost more than her annual salary. The estate sprawled across manicured grounds, like something from a fairy tale, all stone facades and towering windows that blazed with warm, golden light. Luxury cars lined the circular drive. Bentleys and Maseratis nestled between vintage Rolls-Royces like expensive jewelry in a velvet box. Second thoughts? Ethan's voice was gentle, but she caught the tension underneath. His family's world was intimidating even to him sometimes. None, she lied beautifully, squeezing his hand with a confidence that surprised them both. Let's show them what we're made of. The corner of his mouth lifted in that rare, genuine smile she'd only glimpsed a handful of times in 3 years. We, she confirmed, and felt something shift between them, a partnership that went beyond professional courtesy into something infinitely more powerful. The moment their driver opened the car door, Aaliyah understood why Ethan had needed someone he trusted by his side. This wasn't just a Christmas party, it was a performance, a carefully choreographed display of wealth and influence where every conversation was a chess match and every smile carried 3 different meanings. But as Ethan stepped out and turned to offer her his hand, she also understood something else. She wasn't here to fade into the background tonight. The red silk caught the mansion's exterior lights as she emerged from the car, and she felt the exact moment when several conversations on the front steps simply stopped. Men in expensive tuxedos paused mid-sentence. Women in designer gowns turned with the predatory interest of sharks scenting blood in the water. Ethan's hand settled on the small of her back, a touch both possessive and protective that sent heat spiraling through her entire body. Ready? He murmured against her ear, his breath warm against her neck. With you? Always, she whispered back, and felt him go perfectly still beside her. They moved up the marble steps together, and Aaliyah had never felt more beautiful or more powerful in her life. The red dress moved with her like liquid confidence, and every step in her designer heels felt like a declaration, I belong here. The mansion's interior was a masterpiece of old money and new influence. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across cream-colored marble, and Christmas decorations that probably cost more than most people's cars, transformed the space into something magical. The air hummed with the low murmur of Seattle's elite, tech moguls mingling with old shipping fortunes, political power brokers sharing champagne with entertainment industry royalty. "Ethan, there you are." The voice cut through the ambient noise like a blade wrapped in silk. Dahlia turned to see a woman approaching them with the kind of practiced grace that came from decades of commanding attention at events like this. Mid-50s, impeccably maintained, wearing a midnight blue gown that probably had its own insurance policy. Ethan's mother, without question. They had the same storm-grey eyes and the same way of holding themselves as if they owned whatever room they entered. Eleanor Sterling's gaze swept over Aaliyah with the efficiency of a security scanner, cataloguing every detail from her shoes to her jewelry to the way Ethan's hand remained steadfastly at her back. "Mother," Ethan's voice carried the careful neutrality of someone navigating a minefield. "I'd like you to meet Aaliyah Monroe, your assistant." Eleanor's smile was polite and sharp enough to cut glass. "How interesting that you decided to bring her." The pause before assistant was deliberate, loaded with implication, but instead of shrinking under the subtle attack, Aaliyah felt something fierce and protective rise in her chest, not for herself, for Ethan, who tensed beside her like a man preparing for battle. "Mrs. Sterling," Aaliyah extended her hand with a smile that could have powered the mansion's Christmas lights. "What a beautiful home, and what an honor to finally meet the woman who raised such an extraordinary man." The compliment was perfectly calibrated, genuine enough to be disarming, specific enough to show thought, and protective enough of Ethan to establish exactly where her loyalties lay. Eleanor's eyebrows rose fractionally, the first crack in her composed facade. "How diplomatic of you, dear." But there was a note of something almost like approval in the older woman's voice. "Ethan!" A new voice boomed across the space, and Aaliyah turned to see a man in his early 40s approaching with the kind of aggressive confidence that immediately put her on guard. Same dark hair as Ethan, same strong jaw, but where Ethan's presence felt like controlled power, this man radiated something hungrier. "And who's this gorgeous creature?" "My brother James," Ethan murmured to Aaliyah, his hand tightening almost imperceptibly on her back. "James, Aaliyah Monroe." James Sterling took her hand and held it just a fraction too long, his eyes traveling over her with an appreciation that made her skin crawl. "Aaliyah, what a beautiful name for a beautiful woman. Tell me, how did my workaholic brother manage to land someone like you?" The question was designed to embarrass, to reduce her to a trophy, to put Ethan on the defensive, but Aaliyah had spent 3 years watching Ethan handle hostile takeovers and billion-dollar negotiations. She'd learned from the master. "Your brother," she said, her voice warm but with steel underneath, "is the most brilliant man I've ever met. Some people collect art or expensive cars. I collect extraordinary minds. Ethan's happens to come with the bonus of being devastatingly handsome." She felt Ethan's sharp intake of breath, saw James's confident smile falter slightly, and caught Eleanor Sterling's eyes narrow with what might have been respect. "Well," James recovered quickly, "aren't you just full of surprises?" "You have no idea," Ethan said quietly, but with an undercurrent that made every person within hearing distance suddenly very interested in their conversation. As if sensing the shift in atmosphere, other family members began gravitating toward them. Cousins and aunts and family friends, all with the particular brand of curiosity that came from seeing Ethan Sterling, the man who'd never brought a date to any family function, arrive with a woman who looked like she could hold her own in any boardroom or ballroom in the world. And through it all, Aaliyah felt the warmth of Ethan's hand against her back, anchoring her to this moment, this night, this version of herself she was still discovering. But she also felt the weight of dozens of pairs of eyes, assessing, judging, wondering what game was being played and who was winning. The evening was just beginning, and already she could sense the undercurrents of competition and curiosity swirling around them like a tide. What she didn't know yet was that across the room, watching from beside the grand piano, stood Ethan's ex-fiancée, the woman who'd broken his heart 3 years ago and had just returned from London with every intention of winning him back. The night was about to become infinitely more complicated. She moved like silk and danger, and Aaliyah knew trouble when she saw it. The woman approaching them through the crowd was everything the society pages loved to photograph. Willowy height, platinum blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon, wearing a champagne-colored gown that probably cost more than Aaliyah's car. But it wasn't her obvious beauty that made Aaliyah's pulse quicken with warning. It was the way Ethan went absolutely rigid beside her. "Julia." His voice carried no warmth, but Aaliyah caught something underneath. Old pain, carefully buried but not quite dead. "Hello, darling." The woman's accent held traces of British refinement, her smile perfectly practiced. "You look wonderful. Success suits you." "Julia." The name hit Aaliyah like recognition lightning. Julia Hart Pemberton, the banking heiress who'd been featured in every society magazine 3 years ago as Ethan's perfect match. The woman who'd left him 3 weeks before their wedding for a titled European businessman, claiming she needed more excitement than Seattle could offer. The woman who'd broken Ethan Sterling's heart and taught him to build walls around it. "Julia." Ethan's voice was controlled, professional. "I heard you were back from London. Just last month." Julia's eyes flicked to Aaliyah with the casual dismissal of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. "And you must be Ethan's assistant." The pause was deliberate, designed to diminish. But Aaliyah had spent the last hour watching Ethan navigate his family's social minefields, and she'd learned something valuable. Sometimes the best defense was elegant offense. "Aaliyah Monroe," she said, extending her hand with a smile that could have melted steel. "And you must be Julia. Ethan's told me so much about you." The lie was beautifully delivered, implying an intimacy that made Julia's composed expression flicker. Ethan hadn't mentioned his ex-fiancée once in 3 years, but Julia didn't need to know that. "How nice." Julia's handshake was brief, cool. "I hope he only shared the good memories." "Oh, he did." Aaliyah's voice was honey over razor blades. "He said you taught him exactly what he didn't want in a partner." The silence that followed was so complete that nearby conversations seemed to pause. Ethan's sharp intake of breath was audible, and Aaliyah felt his hand move to her waist. Not possessive, but steadying, as if she'd just delivered a blow he hadn't expected her to land. Julia's composure cracked for just an instant, revealing something sharp and wounded underneath. My, the assistant has claws." "When necessary," Aaliyah replied smoothly, "but I prefer to think of it as loyalty." "How admirable." Julia's attention shifted to Ethan, her voice taking on the intimate tone of shared history. "Darling, I was hoping we could have a word about the Pemberton Foundation's investment in Sterling Industries, privately." The request was perfectly reasonable on the surface, but Aaliyah could feel the undercurrents, the assumption that she would step aside, the implication that serious business discussions were beyond her scope, the subtle reminder of connections and history that predated Aaliyah's existence in Ethan's world. "Actually," Ethan's voice cut through the tension like a blade, "Aaliyah handles all my investment communications. Anything you need to discuss with me, you can discuss with her present." The words hit like a thunderclap. In 3 sentences, Ethan had just elevated Aaliyah from invisible assistant to trusted partner, had made it clear that his loyalty lay not with old connections, but with the woman at his side, had drawn a line in the sand that even Julia couldn't pretend to misunderstand. "I see." Julia's smile grew sharper, more dangerous. "How modern of you, Ethan. Though I do hope you're being careful. Mixing business with pleasure can be so complicated." The implication was clear, that Aaliyah was nothing more than an office affair, a temporary distraction from serious matters like family and tradition and the kind of connections that built dynasties. But instead of shrinking under the attack, Aaliyah felt something powerful unfurl in her chest. 3 years of watching Ethan command rooms had taught her something about power. It wasn't about volume or aggression. It was about unshakable confidence in your own worth. "You're absolutely right," Aaliyah said, her voice carrying a warmth that somehow made her next words even more devastating. "It's so important to choose partners who share your values. Loyalty, for instance, commitment, the ability to appreciate what you have instead of constantly searching for something better." Each word was carefully chosen, a reminder of Julia's abandonment, a celebration of everything she'd thrown away. And through it all, Aaliyah kept her tone light, conversational, as if she were discussing the weather rather than delivering a masterclass in elegant destruction. Julia's face went pale beneath her expertly applied makeup. "I should find my host and thank him for the lovely party. Give my regards to whoever you're here with," Ethan said quietly, and the dismissal was absolute. They watched Julia retreat through the crowd, her perfect posture rigid, with barely controlled fury. Only when she was safely across the room did Ethan turn to face Aaliyah fully. "That was," he began, then shook his head, something like wonder in his expression. Necessary, Aaliyah finished firmly. She came to mark her territory. I just reminded her it was already claimed. The words hung between them, loaded with implications neither of them was quite ready to examine. But the truth was there, undeniable. Somewhere between this morning's professional distance and tonight's intimate confessions, something fundamental had shifted between them. "Dance with me," Ethan said suddenly, his voice rough with emotion. The request wasn't really a question, and Aaliyah found herself nodding before her brain caught up with her heart. He led her onto the dance floor where other couples swayed to music, provided by a string quartet, but the moment his arms came around her, the rest of the world disappeared. This close, she could see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes, could feel the warmth of his body through the fine fabric of his tuxedo. His hand on her waist burned through the silk of her dress, and when she placed her palm on his chest, she could feel the rapid beat of his heart. "Thank you," he murmured against her ear, his breath warm against her neck, "for defending us, for being magnificent, for being exactly who I need you to be." "Ethan," his name was a whisper, a question, a prayer. "I know," he said softly, his arm tightening around her. "I know this is complicated. I know we should probably talk about what this means, what we're doing." She could feel eyes on them from every corner of the room. His family, his mother's friends, business associates, and somewhere in the crowd, Julia watching with the intensity of a predator planning her next move. But all of that faded into background noise compared to the way Ethan was looking at her, as if she were the most precious thing he'd ever held. "But right now," he continued, his voice low and intimate, "I just want to dance with the most incredible woman in this room and pretend that the rest of the world doesn't exist." As they swayed together to music that seemed written just for them, Aaliyah realized that pretending wasn't necessary. The rest of the world had already disappeared. The way he touched her should have been illegal in 12 states. Aaliyah felt Ethan's hand slide across the small of her back as they moved through the crowd, his touch both protective and possessive, in a way that sent liquid fire through her veins. They'd been dancing for what felt like hours, lost in their own private world while Seattle's elite swirled around them like beautiful, expensive wallpaper. But now, as he guided her toward the mansion's terrace for some air, she was hyper-aware of every point where their bodies connected. The warmth of his palm through red silk, the way his thumb traced small absent circles against her spine, the careful space he maintained between them that somehow felt more intimate than if he'd pulled her flush against him. "You're thinking too hard," he murmured against her ear as they stepped into the December night. The terrace overlooked the Sound, where city lights reflected like fallen stars on dark water. Christmas lights wrapped around the stone balustrade cast everything in warm golden hues, and the subtle strains of music from inside created a soundtrack that felt written specifically for this moment. "Someone has to," she replied, though her voice came out breathier than intended. "One of us should be sensible about what's happening here." Ethan turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his grey eyes made her breath catch. "And what exactly is happening here, Aaliyah?" The question hung between them like a challenge. She could feel the weight of it, the importance of her answer. They were standing at the edge of something that would reshape both their worlds, and once they stepped over that line, there would be no going back to professional distance and careful boundaries. "You know what's happening," she whispered, her courage surprising even herself. "You've known for as long as I have." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with devastating gentleness. 3 years, he said quietly. 3 years of watching you walk into my office every morning and wondering what it would feel like to... Ethan. The interruption came from behind them, sharp and unwelcome. Julia stepped onto the terrace like she owned it, her champagne-colored gown catching the light as she moved. But there was something different about her now, a hardness around her eyes that hadn't been there during their earlier confrontation. "I'm sorry to interrupt this touching moment." Julia's voice carried acid wrapped in silk. "But there's something Aaliyah should know about the man she's so clearly infatuated with." Ethan's jaw tightened, his hand dropping from Aaliyah's face as he stepped slightly in front of her. "Julia, don't." "Don't what, darling? Tell her the truth." Julia's smile was razor-sharp. "Tell her about the SEC audit into Sterling Industries' financial disclosures, about the regulatory questions being raised about the Hartfield merger documentation." The words hit like physical blows. Aaliyah felt the color drain from her face as she looked between Ethan and Julia, searching for some sign that this was another game, another attempt to drive a wedge between them. But the way Ethan's shoulders tensed, the careful blankness that settled over his features, These were the tells she'd learned to read over 3 years of working beside him. He was hiding something. "The concerns are unfounded," Ethan said quietly, his voice steady but strained. "Someone's been feeding misleading information to the SEC to delay the merger and damage the company's reputation." "Regulatory violations?" Aaliyah's voice was barely a whisper. "There are actual violations being investigated." "Not violations, questions," Julia interjected sweetly. "But when the SEC starts digging deeper, and they will, anyone closely associated with Ethan professionally or personally could face scrutiny. Your career, your reputation, your future, all of it becomes collateral damage." The night suddenly felt colder, the beautiful lights and romantic atmosphere dissolving into something sinister. Aaliyah's mind raced, connecting dots she'd never wanted to see. The late-night calls Ethan took in his private office, the meetings with lawyers that weren't on his official calendar, the way he'd been working longer hours lately, carrying tension in his shoulders that she'd attributed to normal business stress. "Aaliyah," Ethan's voice was rough, desperate. "Let me explain." "How long?" she asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "How long have you known about this audit?" The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Even Julia seemed to sense that she'd unleashed something bigger than she'd intended, stepping back slightly as if to avoid the fallout. 6 weeks, Ethan finally admitted, the words torn from somewhere deep and painful. "But I swear to you, the concerns are completely unfounded. Someone's orchestrating this to destroy everything I've built." 6 weeks. Aaliyah repeated the words as if testing their weight. "You've known for 6 weeks that there was an SEC audit, and you brought me to a family party. You made me your date. You danced with me and touched me and made me feel like—" Her voice broke, the full implications crashing over her like ice water. If she was publicly associated with Ethan when charges were filed, her own reputation would be destroyed. 3 years of building her career, of proving herself in a world that already made everything harder for someone like her, could disappear overnight. "You made me feel like I mattered to you," she finished quietly, "when really I'm just another person whose life you're willing to risk for your own convenience." "That's not true." The words erupted from Ethan with the force of something that had been building pressure for years. "You matter to me more than anything. More than the company, more than my reputation, more than my own damn life. I didn't tell you because I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. So instead, you decided to destroy my career along with yours? The charges won't stick because there's nothing to stick to," he said desperately. "I thought I could protect you from all of this. You thought wrong." Aaliyah's voice was steady now, strengthened by hurt and betrayal, and the terrible clarity that came with having your world shattered in a single conversation. "You don't get to make that choice for me, Ethan. You don't get to decide what risks I'm willing to take with my own life." She turned to leave, her red dress swirling around her legs like liquid fire, but Ethan's hand caught her wrist. "Please," he said, and she'd never heard his voice so broken. "Don't let her win. Don't let Julia's jealousy destroy what we have." Aaliyah looked back at him. This man who'd commanded her respect for 3 years, who'd made her feel invisible and invaluable in equal measure, who'd just spent the evening making her believe she could be the center of his world. "What we have," she said softly, "is built on a lie." She pulled free from his grip and walked back into the mansion, her head held high despite the fact that her heart was breaking with every step. Behind her she could hear Julia's low, satisfied laugh, and the sound followed her like poison through the golden light and holiday music. The Cinderella evening was over, and Aaliyah Monroe had just learned that some fairy tales were designed to break your heart. Monday morning arrived like a slap of cold reality. Aaliyah sat in her car outside Sterling Industries' gleaming tower, hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Through the tinted glass, she watched the familiar parade of employees streaming through the lobby's revolving doors, the same people she'd shared elevators with for 3 years, the same faces that would soon be whispering about her involvement with their CEO if Julia's threat came to pass. The red dress hung in her closet like evidence of a crime. The woman who'd worn it Saturday night felt like a stranger now, someone reckless enough to believe in fairy tales, naive enough to think that men like Ethan Sterling fell in love with their assistants without ulterior motives. Her phone buzzed for the 15th time that morning. Ethan's name flashed on the screen, followed by another text she wouldn't read. She'd stopped reading them sometime around 2 a.m. Sunday morning. When her pillow had finally absorbed all the tears, she'd thought she was too strong to cry. The elevator ride to the 52nd floor felt like ascending to her own execution. Every floor that passed was another second closer to facing him, to pretending that Saturday night hadn't happened, to rebuilding walls that red silk and storm-grey eyes had obliterated in a single evening. Her desk looked exactly the same, pristine, organized, safely professional. But as she settled into her chair and began the morning routine that had anchored her life for 3 years, everything felt different. The coffee she prepared tasted like ashes. The schedule she reviewed blurred before her eyes. At exactly 7:47 a.m., she knocked on Ethan's office door. "Come in." His voice was rough, strained. He looked like he hadn't slept. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, his tie hanging loose around his neck. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and when he looked up at her entrance, the raw pain in his expression nearly broke her resolve. "Your coffee," she said, setting the cup on his desk with practiced efficiency. "You have the Morrison call at 9, lunch with the board at 12:30, and the Hartfield merger documents need your review by Aaliyah." Her name was a prayer, a plea, a confession all wrapped into 2 syllables. "We need to talk." "No, we don't." She kept her voice steady, professional. "What we need to do is maintain appropriate boundaries and continue working together until you find my replacement." The words hit him like physical blows. She could see it in the way his shoulders sagged, in the sudden pallor that crossed his features. "Your replacement? I'll be submitting my resignation this afternoon. 2 weeks' notice as per company policy." "You can't resign." He stood so abruptly his chair rolled backward into the window. "Aaliyah, you can't leave because of a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding. The careful control she'd maintained snapped like a wire pulled too tight. "You call lying to me for 2 months about a federal investigation a misunderstanding? I was protecting you. You were protecting yourself." The words erupted from somewhere deep and wounded. "You were making sure you had someone loyal and competent to help manage your crisis. Someone who cared about you enough to work 18-hour days without asking questions. Someone naive enough to believe you actually—" She stopped herself before she could finish the sentence, before she could voice the humiliating truth that she'd believed he might actually love her. "Actually what?" His voice was soft, dangerous. "Say it, Aaliyah. Tell me what you thought I actually felt for you." The challenge hung between them like a live wire. She could see something desperate in his eyes, something that looked almost like hope, and it made her chest tight with emotions she couldn't afford to feel. "It doesn't matter what I thought," she said finally. "What matters is that you made a choice to keep me in the dark about something that could damage my career. You decided my future for me without giving me the courtesy of informed consent. Because I knew you'd run." The admission exploded from him with the force of 3 years' worth of buried feelings. "I knew that if you found out about the audit, you'd disappear from my life, and I can't lose you, Aaliyah." Something in his voice, raw, broken, completely stripped of the polished confidence she'd always associated with Ethan Sterling, made her look at him, really look at him, for the first time since she'd entered his office. He was falling apart. "The SEC concerns are baseless," he continued, his voice quieter now but no less intense. "Someone's trying to sabotage the Hartfield merger by raising questions about our financial disclosures. My lawyers think it's connected to a competitor who wants to see Sterling Industries weakened before they make their own acquisition attempt." "Even if that's true," she said, hating how her resolve wavered at the pain in his eyes, "you still should have told me. You still should have let me make my own choice about whether the potential scrutiny was worth the risk." "You're right." The simple admission caught her off guard. No justifications, no excuses, just acknowledgement of her pain and his mistake. "You're absolutely right, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry for being selfish, for making decisions that weren't mine to make, for letting my fear of losing you override my respect for your autonomy." The apology was everything she'd needed to hear, but it came too late. The trust between them lay shattered like crystal on marble, and she didn't know if all the sorries in the world could piece it back together. "I need to get back to work," she said quietly. "Aaliyah, please." He moved around the desk, and for a moment she thought he might reach for her. But he stopped just close enough that she could smell his cologne, could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could see the pulse beating rapidly at the base of his throat. "Give me a chance to make this right. Give us a chance." The word us hit her like a physical blow, because despite everything, despite the lies and the fear and the broken trust, there was still an us. Still, something electric and precious and impossibly fragile sparking in the space between them. "I don't know if there is an us," she whispered, the admission costing her everything. "Then let me prove there is." His voice was soft, urgent. Let me show you that Saturday night wasn't about convenience or manipulation or anything other than a man falling so completely in love with a woman that he lost his mind trying to protect what they had. The words hung in the air between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Love. He'd said love. But before she could respond, before she could process what that admission meant or how it changed everything, her phone buzzed with an urgent text. Turn on the news. Now. Jasmine. Something cold and terrible settled in her stomach as she pulled up the news app on her phone. The headline made her blood freeze. Sterling Industries CEO under federal investigation for money laundering. Exclusive photos from Saturday's charity. Gala shows Sterling with unidentified woman. Below the headline was a photograph that made her world tilt on its axis. Ethan and her on the dance floor, his arms around her waist, her face tilted up toward his with an expression of complete adoration. She was no longer unidentified. She was about to become the most talked-about woman in Seattle, and her carefully constructed professional life was about to become very public collateral damage. Monday morning felt like the beginning of the end. Aaliyah sat at her kitchen table, staring at her laptop screen, where a single email had turned her world upside down. The message from Sterling Industries' HR department was polite, professional, and devastating. Effective immediately, she was being placed on administrative leave, pending an internal investigation into potential conflicts of interest. 3 years of impeccable service, reduced to corporate suspicion because she dared to feel something for the man she worked with every day. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she couldn't bring herself to move. Through her apartment windows, Seattle's December morning looked grey and unforgiving, matching the heaviness in her chest. The phone had rung twice. Her mother, then Jasmine, but she'd let both calls go to voicemail. She wasn't ready to explain what she couldn't fully understand herself. A soft knock on her door made her look up. Not the aggressive delivery knock she was expecting, but something gentler, more hesitant. Through the peephole, she saw Ethan standing in her hallway, and her heart did that familiar skip that she'd been trying to suppress for 3 years. He looked tired, his usually perfect appearance slightly disheveled. His tie was gone, his shirt unbuttoned at the throat, and there was something vulnerable about the way he stood there like a man who wasn't sure he'd be welcome. Against every rational thought in her head, she opened the door. "How did you know about the email?" she asked quietly. "I didn't," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. "I just knew that when the board met this morning, your name would come up. I tried to stop it, but they suspended me anyway." She stepped aside to let him in, hating how natural it felt to have him in her space, how right it seemed despite everything falling apart around them. "Aaliyah, I'm so sorry." The words came out broken, weighted with genuine pain. "This is exactly what I was trying to prevent. You getting hurt because of my problems, because of my feelings for you. Your feelings for me didn't create the investigation," she said, moving to the kitchen island, needing the physical barrier between them. "Your choice to hide it from me did." He flinched at the direct hit but didn't argue. "You're right, and now you're paying the price for my mistake." The admission hung between them, honest and painful. Outside, December rain began pattering against the windows, creating a cocoon of intimacy that made everything feel more intense, more immediate. "I've been sitting here for hours," she said, gesturing at her laptop, "trying to figure out how we got here. 3 years ago I was invisible to you, just another efficient assistant in a sea of professional faces. And now you're everything," Ethan finished quietly, his grey eyes holding hers, with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You became everything so gradually that I didn't realize it was happening until it was too late to protect either of us." The confession hit her like a physical blow, not because it was surprising, but because it echoed the truth she'd been hiding from herself for months. "When did it start for you?" she asked, surprised by her own courage. "When did I stop being just your assistant?" Ethan was quiet for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft, almost vulnerable. "Do you remember last spring when you had food poisoning and called in sick for 3 days? She nodded, confused by the seeming non-sequitur. "I couldn't concentrate on anything. Every meeting felt wrong, every decision felt incomplete. I kept reaching for my phone to ask you something, or turning to make a comment knowing you'd understand the context immediately." He paused, running a hand through his hair. "On the 3rd day I realized I wasn't missing my assistant. I was missing you." The memory hit her with unexpected force. Those same 3 days when she'd lain in bed feeling awful and inexplicably disappointed that he hadn't called to check on her, even though that would have been completely inappropriate. But I convinced myself it was professional dependence, he continued, that you were just exceptionally good at your job, and I'd grown too accustomed to your competence. And Saturday night, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Saturday night I saw you in that dress and realized I'd been lying to myself for months, maybe years. His eyes found hers again, holding her gaze with devastating honesty. You weren't just beautiful, though you took my breath away. You were brave, brilliant, protective of what we had before either of us had admitted there was something to protect. The truth of his words settled over her like warm rain. Because she had been protective that night, not just of herself, but of him, of them, of whatever fragile thing had been growing between them in the silence of shared glances and professional intimacy. I love you, he said simply, no dramatics, no grand gestures, just truth, offered like a gift with no expectation of reciprocation. I love your intelligence, your integrity, the way you make me want to be better than I am. I love that you see through my professional facade to the man underneath and somehow still think I'm worth your time. The words hung in the air between them, beautiful and terrifying, and absolutely honest. Ethan, she began, then stopped, overwhelmed by the weight of what she wanted to say. I know, he said quickly. I know this is complicated. I know loving me has cost you your job, possibly your career. I know I have no right to ask you to risk anything else. He moved toward the door and panic flared in her chest. But I need you to know, he continued, his hand on the doorknob, that whatever happens with the investigation, whatever the board decides, whatever the future holds, these feelings are real. What we have is real. And if you'll let me, I'll spend however long it takes proving that to you. He was leaving. Actually leaving, without demanding an answer, without pressuring her for a decision, giving her space to choose, the way he should have done from the beginning. And in that moment of potential loss, Aaliyah finally understood what she'd been too afraid to admit. Ethan, wait. He turned, hope and fear warring in his expression. I love you too, she said, the words tumbling out before fear could stop them. I've been in love with you for so long that I forgot what it felt like not to be. And yes, it's terrifying, and yes, it's complicated, and yes, it might destroy everything I've worked for. She moved toward him, closing the distance between them with steady steps. But loving you isn't the mistake, she said, stopping just close enough to see the flecks of silver in his grey eyes. Hiding from it is. The distance between them disappeared like morning mist. When Aaliyah stepped toward Ethan, something fundamental shifted in the air between them. 3 years of carefully maintained professional boundaries, weeks of emotional turmoil, days of doubt and fear, all of it dissolved in the space of a heartbeat. Say it again, Ethan whispered, his voice rough with wonder and disbelief. Tell me you love me. I love you, she repeated, each word deliberate, certain. I love you, Ethan Sterling, and I'm tired of being afraid of what that means. He reached for her then, his hands framing her face with a tenderness that made her chest tight with emotion. His thumbs traced the line of her cheekbones as if he were memorizing every detail, afraid this moment might disappear if he blinked. Aaliyah, he breathed her name like a prayer, like an answer to every question he'd never known how to ask. Kiss me, she whispered, and watched his pupils dilate, watched his careful control fracture around the edges. When his lips met hers, it was nothing like the polite, restrained contact she might have imagined during late nights, when her mind wandered to dangerous places. This was 3 years of suppressed longing distilled into a single moment of contact. His mouth was warm, urgent, speaking a language they'd both been fluent in but never allowed themselves to use. Aaliyah felt her hands tangle in his hair, felt the solid warmth of his chest beneath her palms as she pressed closer. Every nerve ending in her body seemed to spark to life, as if she'd been sleepwalking through her own existence until this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the first day you brought me coffee and corrected my grammar on the Morrison contract, he confessed, his voice low and intimate. She laughed softly, the sound mixing relief with joy. The first day? I was terrified you were going to fire me for being presumptuous. I was terrified I was going to kiss you right there in the conference room, he admitted. You stood up to me with such quiet confidence, and all I could think about was what it would feel like to have that intelligence and strength focused entirely on me. The confession sent heat spiraling through her, but it was more than physical attraction. It was the realization that while she'd been falling in love with him, he'd been falling just as hard for her. His phone buzzed against his jacket, the sound jarring in the intimate quiet of her apartment. He ignored it, but it buzzed again, insistent. "You should check that," she said reluctantly. "It might be important." Ethan pulled out his phone, his expression shifting as he read the message. "It's my lawyer," he said, looking up at her with something like amazement in his eyes. "They found the source of the misleading information. Julia's been working with Meridian Capital. They've been feeding false documents to the SEC to delay our merger and create regulatory concerns." Aaliyah felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. "Julia, your ex-fiancée Julia. Apparently she's been consulting for Meridian, who wanted to destabilize Sterling Industries before their own acquisition attempt. The SEC is satisfied with our explanations. The audit concerns have been cleared, and they're now investigating Meridian for market manipulation." He shook his head, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. "It's over, Aaliyah. The regulatory questions, the threat to the merger, all of it." The relief was overwhelming, but it was complicated by a strange sense of disappointment. "So the regulatory concerns were manufactured," she said quietly. "The risk to my career, the audit, the feelings were real," Ethan said quickly, seeming to understand her train of thought. "What happened between us, what we admitted to each other, that had nothing to do with SEC audits or regulatory complications. That was just us, finally being honest about what we've both known for a long time." He was right, and she knew it. The love she felt for him, the way her heart raced when he looked at her, the way their bodies seemed to fit together perfectly. None of that had anything to do with external circumstances. It was simply, purely them. "What happens now?" she asked, suddenly aware that they were standing in her living room, having confessed their love for each other, with nothing but possibility stretching ahead of them. "Now," Ethan said, his voice carrying a new note of confidence, of certainty, "I take you to dinner, somewhere beautiful and public where I can hold your hand and not worry about professional appropriateness or conflict of interest policies." The image was intoxicating, walking into a restaurant beside him, not as his assistant but as the woman he loved, not hiding their connection but celebrating it. "And after dinner?" she asked, surprised by her own boldness. Something dark and delicious flickered in his eyes. "After dinner we figure out how to make up for 3 years of pretending we didn't want each other." The promise in his voice sent heat flooding through her, but it was more than physical desire. It was the prospect of exploring this connection they'd both been denying, of discovering what they could build together now that all the barriers were down. "I should probably call HR," she said practically, though part of her wanted to forget about the outside world entirely. "Let them know about the investigation being closed, discuss returning to work." "Actually," Ethan said, his expression shifting to something more serious, "I've been thinking about that, about us working together now that everything's changed." Aaliyah felt a flicker of concern. "You don't want me to come back." "I want you to come back as my partner," he said simply. "Not my assistant. I want to promote you to senior operations manager first. Then we can work toward director level. Give you the recognition and growth path you've earned over the past 3 years. What we have personally doesn't change the fact that you're the most competent, intelligent business mind I've ever worked with." The offer was significant, a real step forward professionally that felt achievable. But more than that, it was proof that he saw her as an equal, that his feelings for her weren't about power dynamics or workplace hierarchies, but about genuine respect and love. "Senior operations manager," she repeated, testing the words. "That's a substantial promotion and a realistic path forward." "It's what you deserve," he replied, stepping closer again, drawn back into her orbit. "And with your talent, you'll be running operations within 2 years. I'm hoping you'll consider not just the professional opportunity, but the personal one as well." "What personal opportunity is that?" she asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "The opportunity to fall asleep next to someone who loves you," he said softly. "The opportunity to wake up every morning knowing you're exactly where you belong. The opportunity to build something beautiful with someone who sees you, really sees you, and loves everything he finds." The words were everything she'd never let herself hope for, delivered by the man she'd never let herself dream about. Standing in her apartment, rain pattering against the windows, Seattle's December afternoon creating the perfect backdrop for new beginnings, Aaliyah realized that sometimes the best fairy tales were the ones that felt completely, perfectly real. "Yes," she said simply, and watched his face transform with joy. "Yes to the promotion. Yes to everything," she clarified, reaching up to touch his face to ground herself in the reality of this moment. "Yes to loving you without hiding it. Yes to building something beautiful together. Yes to whatever comes next. When he kissed her again, deeper this time, more certain, Aaliyah tasted the future on his lips. Complicated and wonderful, and absolutely worth every risk they'd taken to get here. 18 months later, Aaliyah stood before her bathroom mirror, smoothing down a dress that was everything the red one had been, but different. This one was midnight blue, elegant and confident, without being defiant. Professional enough for a corporate event, beautiful enough to make Ethan's eyes darken with appreciation. It was the dress of a woman who knew exactly who she was and what she wanted, and had stopped apologizing for either. Tonight was Sterling Industries' annual New Year's Gala, the company's biggest social event of the year. It would be her first public appearance as Director of Operations, her first time walking into a room full of Seattle's business elite as Ethan's professional equal and personal partner. It would also be their first public appearance as a couple. "You ready for this?" Jasmine asked from the bedroom, where she was putting the finishing touches on her own outfit. As Aaliyah's guest for the evening, she'd insisted on being there for moral support and, in her words, to watch you glow like the queen you are. "I think so," Aaliyah replied, checking her reflection one final time. The woman looking back at her was someone she almost didn't recognize. Confident, radiant, wearing success and love like the most expensive jewelry. Her phone chimed with a text from Ethan. "Car's here. Can't wait to see you." The casual intimacy of it still made her heart skip. 6 weeks of stolen dinners, weekend mornings in each other's apartments, learning the rhythm of loving someone without hiding it, and she still felt that flutter of anticipation every time he reached out to her. The ride to the Four Seasons was filled with comfortable chatter with Jasmine, but underneath, Aaliyah could feel the significance of the evening settling over her like expensive fabric. This wasn't just a work event or a date. This was a statement to Seattle's business community, to the Sterling Industries board, to anyone who'd ever questioned whether she belonged in these rooms. She belonged because she'd earned it, and she was loved because she deserved it. The hotel's ballroom was already filling with the familiar faces of Seattle's power brokers when they arrived. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over tables draped in winter white, and the soft jazz ensemble provided the perfect backdrop for the kind of networking that built empires and brokered deals worth millions. "Aaliyah!" Eleanor Sterling's voice carried across the space, and Aaliyah turned to see Ethan's mother approaching with something that looked suspiciously like genuine warmth. "Mrs. Sterling," Aaliyah smiled, accepting the older woman's kiss on each cheek. "You look lovely this evening." "As do you, my dear, though I suspect my son would say you look absolutely stunning." Eleanor's eyes twinkled with something that might have been approval. "He's been quite impossible to live with since you two made your announcement, you know," grinning like a teenager with his first crush. The image of Ethan Sterling grinning like a teenager made Aaliyah's chest warm with affection and amusement. "I think that might be mutual," she admitted. "Good," Eleanor said firmly. "It's about time someone made that boy remember he's human, and not just a walking quarterly report. Though I do hope you'll keep him somewhat grounded. The board prefers their CEOs to maintain at least a veneer of professional dignity." Before Aaliyah could respond, she felt familiar arms slide around her waist from behind, felt Ethan's lips brush her ear in a greeting that was both intimate and respectful. "Mother, stop intimidating my girlfriend," he said. Though his tone was warm with affection for both women, "Aaliyah's already figured out how to manage me perfectly well without coaching." "Girlfriend seems like such an inadequate word," Eleanor mused, studying them both with the sharp intelligence that had clearly been passed down to her son, "especially given that she's also your business partner now." "Partner," Ethan repeated thoughtfully, his hand settling more securely at Aaliyah's waist. "I like that. It covers all the bases." Aaliyah felt heat rise in her cheeks at the public display of affection, but it was the good kind of heat, the warmth that came from being claimed and cherished by someone who wasn't afraid to show the world how he felt. As the evening progressed, she found herself falling into the rhythm she'd always excelled at, moving through conversations with confidence, contributing insights that made board members nod with respect, building relationships that would benefit Sterling Industries for years to come. But now she did it as herself, as Aaliyah Monroe, Director of Operations, rather than as the invisible woman behind the powerful man, and Ethan watched it all with undisguised pride and admiration. "You're staring," she murmured to him during a brief moment when they found themselves alone at their table. "I'm admiring," he corrected, his voice low and intimate despite the crowd around them. "Watching you work a room is like watching an artist paint. You make it look effortless, but I know the skill and intelligence that goes into every interaction. 3 years of watching you probably helped, she admitted. I learned from the best. No, Ethan said, his expression growing serious. You were already brilliant. I just finally stopped being too blind to see it. Before she could respond, the evening's master of ceremonies called for everyone's attention. The official program was beginning. Speeches about the year's successes, recognition of outstanding employees, and the traditional toast to the year ahead. When Ethan was called to the stage to address the company, Aaliyah watched him command the room with the same confidence and charisma that had first caught her attention 3 years ago. But now she also saw the man underneath the polished exterior, the one who made terrible jokes in the morning before his coffee kicked in, who got adorably frustrated when technology didn't cooperate, who looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world. This year has been one of significant growth for Sterling Industries, Ethan said, his voice carrying easily through the ballroom. We've expanded into new markets, strengthened existing partnerships, and built a foundation for continued success in the years ahead. His eyes found hers in the crowd, and his smile shifted from professional to personal. But perhaps more importantly, he continued, we've also learned that the best partnerships in business and in life are built on mutual respect, trust, and the courage to see people for who they really are, rather than the roles they happen to fill. The words were carefully chosen to be appropriate for a corporate audience, but Aaliyah heard the deeper message underneath. She heard love disguised as professional wisdom, personal truth, wrapped in business speak. So as we toast to the new year, Ethan raised his champagne glass, let's remember that success isn't just measured in quarterly reports and profit margins. It's also measured in the relationships we build, the trust we earn, and the courage we show in pursuing what matters most. The room erupted in applause, but Aaliyah barely heard it. All she could focus on was the way Ethan was looking at her, the promise in his eyes, the certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together. As the evening wound down and guests began to make their departures, Ethan appeared at her side again, his hand finding hers with the natural ease that had developed between them. Ready to go home? He asked quietly. Home. Not his apartment or hers, but the place they'd created together, a space where she could be VP of operations and the woman he loved, where he could be the CEO of a billion-dollar company and the man who made her coffee in the morning exactly the way she liked it. Ready, she said, squeezing his hand. As they walked out of the Four Seasons together, Seattle's December night sparkling around them like a promise, Aaliyah realized that this was what happiness felt like. Not the dramatic, overwhelming emotion she'd expected, but something quieter, steadier, the deep satisfaction of being exactly where she belonged, with exactly the person she was meant to love. The red dress had been the beginning of her transformation. But this, walking hand in hand with Ethan Sterling through the city they'd both claimed as home, equal partners in business and in love, this was the fairy tale she'd never dared to dream was possible. 2 years later, the morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Sterling penthouse, casting golden patterns across the marble kitchen island where Aaliyah sat with her laptop, reviewing quarterly projections over coffee that had gone cold an hour ago. Some things never changed. You know, Ethan's voice came from behind her, warm with sleep and amusement. When I imagined waking up next to the woman I love every morning, I pictured more cuddling and less spreadsheet analysis. She turned to find him leaning against the doorframe, hair tousled, wearing nothing but pajama pants, and the kind of satisfied smile that still made her heart skip after 2 years of mornings like this. Says the man who was up at 5 a.m. reviewing the Tokyo merger documents, she replied, closing the laptop and turning to face him properly. Besides, these projections show we're going to exceed our annual targets by 30%. That's worth getting excited about. Everything about you gets me excited, he said, moving to wrap his arms around her from behind, pressing a kiss to the curve of her neck. But I'm particularly fond of how your mind works when you're solving problems that would make other executives cry. Aaliyah leaned back into his warmth, marveling at how natural this had become, the easy intimacy, the seamless blend of professional partnership and personal love, the way they'd built a life that honored both their ambitions and their hearts. Sterling Industries had thrived under their joint leadership. Ethan as CEO, Aaliyah progressing from senior operations manager to director, and after 18 months of proven results, to VP of operations. They were partners in every sense of the word, equals who challenged each other professionally and supported each other personally. The business world had taken notice. Forbes had featured them on their cover as the power couple redefining corporate leadership. Harvard Business School had invited them to co-teach a seminar on strategic partnerships. 3 headhunters called every week, trying to poach one or both of them for other companies. They turned down every offer. What they'd built together was worth more than any individual opportunity. "What time is the appointment with the wedding planner?" Ethan asked, his voice casual but with an undercurrent of anticipation that made her smile. 2 o'clock, she replied, turning in his arms to face him. "Are you nervous? About marrying you?" "Not even a little." His grey eyes were warm, certain. "About planning a wedding that will satisfy both our mothers and your vision of perfection?" "Terrified." Aaliyah laughed, the sound bright and free. "We've negotiated billion-dollar mergers. I think we can handle centerpiece selection." Famous last words, Ethan murmured, but he was smiling as he said it. The engagement had been perfect in its simplicity. No grand gestures or public proposals, just a quiet Sunday morning 6 months ago when they'd been reading the newspaper together, and Ethan had suddenly said, "I want to marry you." Not a question, but a statement of intent that had made her heart sing with its certainty. She'd looked up from the business section, seen the ring box he was holding with hands that trembled slightly, and realized that some moments didn't need fanfare to be perfect. "I want to marry you too," she'd replied, and watched his face transform with joy. Now planning a wedding while running a company and maintaining the kind of relationship that still made her colleagues envious was proving to be an interesting challenge. But they were good at challenges. They always had been. "I have a confession," Ethan said, his expression growing more serious. "Sometimes I still can't believe this is real, that you chose this, chose me, despite everything it cost you in the beginning." "It didn't cost me anything," Aaliyah replied firmly. "It gave me everything. A career I love, a partnership I respect, a love that makes me better than I ever thought I could be." She reached up to touch his face, thumb tracing the line of his jaw with familiar tenderness. "Besides," she added with a smile, "you're forgetting something important." "What's that?" "You chose me too, and you kept choosing me every day, even when it was complicated and messy, and the whole world was watching." Ethan's kiss was soft, grateful, full of 2 years' worth of mornings like this and the promise of thousands more to come. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Always," he whispered, "I'll always choose you." Outside their penthouse windows, Seattle was waking up, the same city where she'd once sat in her small apartment, afraid to take up too much space, afraid to be seen, afraid to want more than the careful, quiet life she'd constructed for herself. That woman felt like a stranger now, not because she'd changed everything about herself, but because she'd finally stopped hiding who she'd always been underneath the professional camouflage and careful invisibility. She was Aaliyah Monroe, brilliant, ambitious, worthy of love and respect and recognition. She was COO of one of the Pacific Northwest's most successful companies. She was engaged to a man who saw her as his equal in every way that mattered. She was exactly who she'd always been meant to be, and it had all started with a red dress and the courage to stop being invisible. As she looked out at the city spread before them, Aaliyah realized that the best fairy tales weren't about transformation, they were about recognition, about finally being seen for who you'd always been, and having that person be enough, more than enough, perfect. Final message. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop hiding your light and let the world see exactly who you are. Aaliyah's journey reminds us that we are never too small, too invisible, or too ordinary to deserve extraordinary love. The right person won't ask you to dim your brilliance. They'll celebrate it, support it, and help you shine even brighter. Your worth isn't determined by who notices you. Your value isn't conditional on who chooses you. You are already enough, already deserving, already magnificent, exactly as you are. And when someone finally sees you the way Ethan saw Aaliyah, you'll realize that the wait, the patience, the moments of doubt, they were all worth it for a love that recognizes your true worth and never asks you to be anything less than completely, authentically yourself. Your turn to reflect. What would you have done in Aaliyah's position when you discovered Ethan had hidden the investigation from you for 2 months? Would you have been able to forgive him and choose love despite the betrayal of trust? Your participation means a lot to us. Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and comment your thoughts. Your participation is very important to us. See you next time.